everyone. Welcome to the August 4th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to recap last weekend's racing from Saratoga and Del Mar. Obviously, the big day at Saratoga was Saturday's card, featuring the Grade 1 Whitney, as well as the Grade 1 Personal Ensign. Both of those races featured upsets, one of the minor variety. The other was a pretty major upset in the Personal Ensign. We'll talk about those races, as well as the Allen Jerkins and the Bowling Green, the other stakes races from that Saturday card. And out of Del Mar, we saw one of the last major preps for the Kentucky Derby, the Shared Belief Stakes. There was a bit of an upset there, too. We'll also discuss Grade 1 action in the Clement Hirsch and the Bing Crosby. And then we'll talk about a couple other races from around the country to wrap up the show this week. Craig, it was a pretty interesting week of racing. Feels like some of these divisions got turned upside down a little bit, some minor upsets, but really some pretty impressive performances and some speed figures that I think we're going to have fun talking about.
Yeah, there certainly were. There were some very good performances. I'm one who kind of likes when things get muddled up a little bit. I think it's better for us as bettors when we don't have everything set in stone like it looked going in, particularly in races like the Personal Ensign and some others that we saw. So I like the division to be a little more wide open. I think it makes for a better atmosphere, just a better experience for the player, not to have races that we think are just givens when they start and see something different happen.
Now let's start off by discussing the Whitney. That was the big race on Saturday at Saratoga. And this one was an upset of the minor variety, but I felt that this race was a little anticlimactic because when you have some of the top older horses in the country coming together, you want to see everybody have a fair chance and really get a sense of who's best when they all get clean trips. And that wasn't really what we got here. Take nothing away from Improbable. He's obviously in great form right now. He's really taken a step forward as a 4-year-old for Bob Baffert. And he's a deserving winner of the Whitney. You just wish that his competitors had a fair chance.
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy race. Once again, in a NYRA race, we had absolutely no pace. I mean, who never would have dreamed that we'd have had a 25-second opening quarter in a race like this? Maybe part of that was due to Tom's d'Etat having some trouble at the start, but he's not really a front runner either. And Mr. Buff, who's better days, I mean, this horse has really, really tailed off of late. He made the lead in just pedestrian fractions, and unless you thought he was going to rebound and run back to his best races, it was pretty much over at that point, given the position Improbable had. The pace was coded all blue in TimeformUS all the way up and through the mile call, which isn't really any surprise. And Improbable was just running too fast at the end. There was no way they were going to reel him in after that slow pace, kind of like the sprint race we talked about last week.
Yeah, I was posting some of the Trackus fractions for the final 3 furlongs on Twitter, and you just don't see come-home fractions like that in dirt races. And, I mean, that's because these are very good horses, but it's more a function of how slowly they went in the early going. And I think Tom's d'Etat came home in something like 34-4, which is just unheard of in a dirt route, especially at Saratoga. But, I mean, that just speaks to really how well Tom's d'Etat ran it within the context of this race. And I don't know if you can go as far to say that he would have won this race definitively, but I think he would have made it very close. And to me, Tom's d'Etat loses nothing in defeat because, I mean, if you watch the start, when they're going that slowly up front and he loses 2 to 3 lengths at the start, it's just almost impossible to make up that kind of deficit. And I really did think he ran an impressive race to get up for third because just look at how much Code of Honor was negatively affected by that pace. He couldn't make up any ground in the stretch, and Tom's d'Etat was really running fastest of all at the end. It's just a shame that he doesn't get to win a prestigious race like the Whitney because I don't know how much longer we're going to have him around. He's a 7-year-old at this point. You really want to win with these horses when they're in top form as he is. It's just a shame that he couldn't show it on the big day.
Yeah, I should mention the figures for the race. The final time figure for Improbable was a 127. It got knocked down because of pace to a 123. Tom's d'Etat actually got the highest figure in the race of 124 because obviously being last, he doesn't get punished for that slow pace nearly as much, and in fact, not at all in this case. And I think what you brought up is a great point. I wouldn't argue with anyone that said he may have been the best horse in the race, because when you see how easily he was able to outfinish a horse like Code of Honor, who we know has a strong finishing kick, it was in front of him earlier in the race. He was just flying home. So I don't think he really loses anything in defeat. I'm not sure where we're going to see him next, but he certainly ran very well, and I think he's still right there at the top of the division. As we move into talking about the Personal Ensign, I will talk about the figure a little bit more, but that's about it for me on the Whitney. A little bit disappointing, as you say. It was nice to see By My Standards rebound a little. I'm still not sure he's a grade 1 type horse, just a very good grade 2 horse. But given the position he had earlier, he held on well and was able to hold off some of the others. So not the most exciting figure race, but I do think we saw a couple good performances.
I'd agree with that, and I think we're learning that this older male division is a lot more wide open than we might have thought even a couple months ago, or even 4 weeks ago, before Maximum Security returned and ran a similar speed figure. And this race, where we have more players in this division than we actually thought, and I think that's a good segue into the Personal Ensign, because that's turning out to be the same scenario in the older filly and mare division. As you know, Midnight Bisou is a really solid. I don't want to shortchange her. She's a champion, and she's just been at the top of her game for a long time, really since the start of 2019. And in this race, she ran one of her best speed figures ever. So I don't want to take anything away or knock her performance. I just think that she ran into a horse that's at the top of her game at 6 years old and Vexatious, and really got the trip and loved every bit of this 1 1/8 distance.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to knock the performance by either of the top two. Obviously, they both ran very well. Looking at how they ran away from the rest of the field, it was over 6 lengths back to Point of Honor in third, who's proven to be a very good filly at this point. Not really at the top of the division, but she certainly shows up and runs her race every time. Both the winner and the runner-up, Midnight Bisou, got a 125 TimeformUS speed figure for the race. The pace was solid enough. It's not coded red or blue. I would say, if anything, it was just pretty much even all the way throughout. So I think it's just a good, strong performance. I will say I do have a little bit of reservation about the speed figure that I assigned. Both this and the Whitney were run at 1 1/8. And I use the same variant for both. It's one I'm going to keep a close eye on, because I do think it's very possible that the Whitney was affected by the pace and maybe is a little slower than it otherwise had been. Had I rated the Personal Ensign alone, just using the horses in that race, it wouldn't be a huge change, but maybe it would be about 3 points lower. And had I done that, it would make the Whitney would get the P designation, and the figures would probably come out about the same. So it was definitely a tricky call for me, and one I'll be keeping a close eye on. I do wonder when I see horses like Motion to Motion and Abounding Joy have better figures than they've been running, being well beaten back in 4th and 5th. Some of that's because of the pace, but it's just an iffy situation. So it's kind of splitting hairs. Did the top two run 122 or 125? But that is a bit of a difference that I would be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you could say that both of these paces were anything but fast, but the Whitney pace was really as slow as you're ever going to see in one of these grade 1 races for older horses at this level. And they came home as fast as they possibly could. So could they have run faster if the pace had been a little, more within the normal range in the early going? I think that's a tough question for you to answer, but it's possible. I don't have a big problem with the figure you assigned Vexatious and Midnight Bisou. I mean, Midnight Bisou basically ran the same figure that she earned when she just beat a late in this race last year. And it's kind of funny to compare this race to the 2019 Personal Ensign, because it was almost the exact same scenario. Midnight Bisou came into the stretch with a target, looked like she was going to run down Vexatious, except this year she couldn't quite do it because Vexatious really dug in and just fended her off. And I don't want to shortchange Vexatious and make this seem like it's some massive upset, because Vexatious, I know she's been on turf for the most of her career, and they've only given her limited opportunities on dirt, but when she has run on dirt in the right spots, she's run some pretty impressive speed figures in her own right. I mean, she ran a big race in that Summer Colony at Saratoga last year when she almost defeated Blue Prize, who went on to win the Breeders' Cup. She's a good horse, and she's just in top form right now, and I don't want to go without mentioning the job that Jack Sisterson has done with a lot of these Calumet Farm horses. It just seems like so many of these graded stakes horses for him are really running top figures and running their best races. We'll talk about another one out of Del Mar that ran later on Saturday, but he's just doing a great job at these horses.
Yeah, and I guess we should mention there was an inquiry in the race, but I didn't really think there was a whole lot there. Vexatious certainly came out, but I think it was more just to give her a look at the competition. She got right up next to Midnight Bisou, but I didn't really see anything there. Didn't have any problem with the steward's call at all.
No, I'd agree with that. We'll have another steward's decision we'll talk about a little bit more later, one that was a bit more controversial than this one, but I thought this was an easy one to dismiss. Wrapping up the grade 1 action on Saturday at Saratoga was the H. Allen Jerkins for the 3-year-olds, going the 7 furlongs and this one featured a bit of an upset. We had a turning of the tables from the Woody Stevens that was run at Belmont. The big favorite in this race, No Parole, just didn't appear to be himself. He had to sustain a little more pace pressure on the front end, and he just fell apart at the quarter pole. And Echo Town, who had been second in that Woody Stevens, took a step forward off that performance, but let's be honest, Echo Town's always been a nice horse. He always seems to run speed figures that put him right in the mix, and the public sort of let him be the forgotten horse in the race. He went off at 7-1, paid $16 to win, but he made a lot of sense, and he just delivered.
Yeah, he did. I think if I remember right on the forecast, we both thought he was a strong contender, and the odds shocked me in this race, to be honest. It was interesting watching the Fox broadcast. They were highlighting No Parole, and his trainer, Tom Amos, is one of the commentators, and he didn't like what he was seeing at all. And you know, it was one of those times you got some good information from listening to a trainer, because he wasn't acting himself. He didn't run his particular race. Now, you could make some excuse for him in that the fractions were in red, but he's a horse who ran fast last time and kept going. So I don't want to make too much of an excuse just because of pace, but whatever was bugging him in the paddock seemed to carry over to the track. That said, no knocks on Echo Town. He ran a 1:18 TimeformUS speed figure, which is right in line with what he's been running. He got out of the gate a little bit cleaner this time, but he wasn't forwardly placed. He showed he's a little more versatile than he had previously shown coming from further back. But once he got into the lane and got clear, he really kicked clear from the others. So really solid performance. And I don't have any problem saying if this horse develops as you would expect heading into the Breeders' Cup season, he would be a contender in the sprint. It's not like 3-year-olds can't win the sprint. We've seen it many times in the past.
No, and it appears we've got a couple of very talented 3-year-old sprinters out there. We'll get to one that won a race at Del Mar this past weekend as well. But I agree, Echo Town does nothing but run really fast speed figures in these races, and he just shows up every time. He likes to win. He's a real fighter. There's a lot to admire about this horse, and I also don't want to shortchange the second place finisher, Tap It to Win, because he was really the only horse that chased that quick pace and was around at the end. He made the first move to take over at the top of the stretch once No Parole threw in the towel, and I mean, Echo Town beat him by 3.5 lengths, but I thought Tap It to Win, for the first time, showed that he could overcome some adversity, deal with a hotter pace up front and more contested pace, and still finish off a race. It seems like he's putting it all together.
Yeah, it does. He impressed me. I dismissed him. I didn't really think he was a contender in this race. And I mean, really, he probably wasn't for the win. He was never going to beat the winner, judging by it, but he certainly ran very well. And I would argue it's his best race to date, even better than the allowance race he won back in June before his try in the Belmont. So he's certainly a promising sprinter. Hopefully they're going to keep him around 1 turn. I would imagine that's the plan after what happened going 2 turns last year. But just another good 3-year-old sprinter. As for the rest, I wouldn't say there was a whole lot in there. I mean, Shoplifted ran okay, but then when you look at the 5th place finishers, you're going to see some huge prices in Captain Bombastic and Sonoman. So the race definitely kind of fell apart behind. It's a race where the speed horses, other than maybe No Parole, if you want to give him an excuse, were probably a bit over their head. So if they drop back in the more reasonable spots, it's one where maybe they could pick up a piece. Just kind of a handicapping thing for me. Horses that are a little over their head, contest a fast pace, often run well when they're dropped in class. So I wouldn't look for them running back in another grade 1 or even grade 2 sprint, but if they show up in a weaker race, they'll probably be better than their running line looks.
And immediately following I keep calling it the Woody Stevens, immediately following the H. Allen Jerkins on Saturday at Saratoga, they ran the Grade 2 Bowling Green, going 1 3/8 miles on the turf for the older horses. And this one featured a little bit of controversy as our good friend Sadler's Joy appeared to get the victory for a brief moment in time, crossed the wire first, but you could see even on the pan shot that he was trying to lug in badly for the entirety of the stretch drive, and the stewards rightfully took a long look at it, and obviously, he caused the chain reaction that affected multiple horses. You can debate who was cost a position and who wasn't, but generally in these situations, when there's a really hard bump, like there was between Sadler's Joy and Cross Border, which that affected the horses to the inside in turn, the stewards in New York, they pretty consistently make a ruling against the offender in that situation. And that's what they did, and they placed Sadler's Joy fourth, and it elevated Cross Border to the victory.
Yeah, I didn't have any problem with that disqualification at all. As you say, they're usually pretty consistent with that in New York. It was a sound bump. When you saw the head on, I was almost certain it was going to be disqualified. It is one of those cases where I don't think there's much doubt Sadler's Joy was the best horse, but that's not how it works here in the States. The best horse, it doesn't guarantee you a win if you foul somebody. He definitely cost some other horses a placing, in my opinion. So down he goes, and he got DQ'd. Not only that, they probably put him in the right spot. But that said, it was a solid enough race. Both Cross Border and Sadler's Joy got 125 TimeformUS speed figures. All the top 5 were within 123 and 125. So it was a really good Grade 2 race. It was interesting from a strategy standpoint. We had talked on the forecast how Marzo and Cross Border seemed to have all the speed in the race, but watching the warm-up, it was pretty obvious Marzo was the one who was going to go. He was being warmed up really vigorously, whereas Cross Border wasn't. And really looking back at Cross Border's past performances, even though he does have speed, he tends to run a little better with the target. I don't know if he would have won. Like I said, I do think Sadler's Joy was the best, but I think it was the right decision, and it was a decent enough race. I think we'll see a lot of these horses in Grade 1s. The one I was not really surprised is, I mentioned him on the forecast. I liked Highland Sky. He got elevated up to second, and he seems to be rounding back into that really good form he showed earlier in his career as a 3-year-old.
Yeah, that was a good call in Highland Sky because he was a big price in this race. He was the one that they just completely ignored. And he's a horse that's run some big races on occasion. And as you said, it seems like he's getting back into form. Yeah, I don't know if Cross Border wouldn't have won this race outright without trouble. Cross Border is a horse that loves to win races, and he's a hard fighter. And it seemed like he was really trying to come back right when the bump occurred. And Sadler's Joy is a horse that has a ton of hang in him. So, I would he have held on if he hadn't fouled those horses? I don't know. I'm not willing to say that. But I think in those situations, it's the right call to kind of side with the horse that was fouled. They get the benefit of the doubt. So I have no problem with elevating Cross Border to the victory. And he's just a cool horse. He does well at any distance. I think the first start that he made for Mike Maker was going 6 furlongs on the turf, and he almost won it. And he's effective going as far as 1.5 miles. He's a New York bred, just like Some Like It Hot Brown is. Mike Maker's got 2 of the best New York bred turf horses anywhere in the country, it seems, at this point. So he's just a really admirable horse. I don't know if these are the best turf horses in the country, but it was an interesting race to analyze. And we'll wrap up the Saturday action at Saratoga with the first race on the card, which was actually a maiden race for the 2-year-olds going 6 furlongs. And we saw the horse that might end up being the hopeful favorite if everything proceeds well for this horse in the next few weeks, as Reinvestment Risk for Klarovich Stables and Chad Brown came through on the inside at the top of the stretch and just ran away from this field. A really impressive finish for this first-time starting 2-year-old.
Yeah, it was impressive visually and figure-wise. He got a 109 TimeformUS speed figure, which is the best we've seen from a 2-year-old this year so far. And the final time was actually 114. It was knocked down a little because of the slow pace. What impressed me the most is he was able to track the pace, track a few lengths behind. He showed some versatility, being able to just rate, which a lot of times you get these big figures in 2-year-old races, and it's just a horse going out, taking the lead, going really fast. And I saw a little more from that in Reinvestment Risk. And I have no problem at this point saying he's the best 2-year-old I've seen, both from looking professional and also from a speed figure perspective.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, he rated well in behind horses, and as you said, he came home very fast in the final quarter mile. This was a race coming in where there were a lot of stories about horses that had been working well. Seemed like this is one that could produce some live runners even in maiden races later in the meet, so it's worth monitoring the runbacks. There were some horses that were beaten a long way in this race that really didn't run badly, all things considered. So watch this one for trips and look for some horses coming back out of this race to see if they validate that speed figure, that reinvestment risk earned, because he seems like the real deal. Staying at Saratoga and going back a few days, I wanted to just briefly touch upon that New York bred stakes race that we saw, I believe, on Thursday, the John Morrissey going 7 furlongs. As a funny guy, didn't earn the best speed figure that we've seen from him. I think he ran a little bit faster in his comeback off the layoff in the commentator, but just want to mention this horse because John Terranova's got him in great form right now. I know they're talking about trying open company with him in the future. I could see it because I know he didn't run that fast in this race, but he was just pretty dominant against this field.
Yeah, he was. And this is a race, even as a speed figure guy, I'm putting no stock in the speed figure whatsoever. It's accurate for what we saw, but I don't think it tells us a whole lot about Funny Guy. He only got a 113. It was not, the 118 was his final time figure. There is a bit of a pace adjustment in there. We'll have the P rating, but it was another NYRA race where the pace was just so slow, it was almost impossible to give a good rating. So this race was basically rated in isolation. All the fractions are coded in blue. If you look at the horses in behind, that's what we try to do, make the figures make sense for the majority of the field in this situation. And occasionally a horse like Funny Guy is going to take the brunt of that method, but long term it works out. There's no point rating him as a 122 and overrating the rest of the field. As a handicapper, it's just a race I'm going to look at. I'm going to see the blue fractions and the P and say, good effort. I'm not going to judge him on that from a figure perspective. I'll go back to that 122 he ran last time. And that tells me he probably could run in graded stakes in open company. He certainly seems to be moving in the right direction. He looks very professional doing it. And I think the future's bright for this guy. I look forward to seeing him in open company.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of these performances we're talking about, like Improbable, who's obviously a better horse than Funny Guy right now, but same pattern. They were pretty good 3-year-olds, but they've just really taken a step forward, staying in training as 4-year-olds. So it's nice to see these horses stay around and really show, fulfill their potential. One more race to touch upon from Saratoga last week took place on Wednesday. It was an optional claiming $150,000 allowance race, and this one was won by Breaking the Rules. This is a horse who came off a very long layoff to win, I believe, on Belmont Stakes Day a number of weeks ago, and he validated that return effort in this spot, coming from pretty well off the pace because we have a bit of a runoff on the front end with Guido, as is often the case with that horse. But Breaking the Rules got to the front end and just kicked away from these horses, beat a solid field, and seems like he's ready for that step back up into graded stakes company.
Yeah, he sure does. He got a 120 for the win. He was coming out of that very strong race, which he beat Digital Age, who's already come back to win. Some other horses have come back out of that race and run very well. So it was certainly a strong race, and not a whole lot to say on it. He certainly looks ready for stakes company. Obviously, with Guido in there running off, all the fractions are going to be coded in red. I do think that kind of makes for interesting handicapping in the future, because it does seem to me like a lot of times some horses or some riders get really tentative when we get this really fast pace. They're not really sure how close they should be. They kind of have late runs. So I do think there's some excuses in here, but Breaking the Rules had a great spot. When the speed backed up, he just kind of took over and was able to hold the others off pretty easily. So for me, these races are always kind of fun. I don't know why. I grew up in Maryland watching a horse named Rocket Guitar, who was a 5-furlong turf sprinter, but every now and then they would try him long. Horses used to run a lot more often back then, and there were less grass races. So, they would see a grass race and give him a shot. And I would say at least half the time he would open up by 10 lengths and he would just hold on because the other people didn't know what to do. Other times he wouldn't. He'd wind up, beating the pole. But I just always like watching these kind of races with these runoffs. I'm not sure what they're going to do with Guido. They've tried sprinting him recently, tried routing him. He just seems like he's too headstrong, and I don't know what the deal is with him.
No, I agree. It's fun to watch those runoff types. I mean, one of my favorite horses from the past decade or so was Precious Passion, who would just run off in these marathon turf races. Almost won the Breeders' Cup Turf doing that once. Won the United Nations, opening up like a 25-length lead in the early going. Those are some fun races to watch back. Guido doesn't have quite as much fight in him as Precious Passion did, because he often chucks it in the stretch once he goes too fast, and he faded to finish last in this race, obviously. One of the thing I want to note about this race is that if you're looking at the official fractions for the first two calls, at least, I'm pretty sure they're not correct. I think we might have just missed Guido on the teletimer. Yeah, this was a pretty fast pace, even though the fractions that are published in the form might not reflect that.
Yeah, I forgot to put the T on this race, or if I did, it didn't show up in the chart, but it's definitely one I timed the fractions from video, and they're pretty darn accurate, maybe within a tenth of a second at worst. So, which you'll see in the Timeform US PPs is good. I didn't use the posted fractions.
You mean accurate from Trackus, I assume?
Pardon?
You mean accurate from Trackus, I assume?
No, I actually timed them from video. The problem with using Trackus is if you compare it to the other races, Trackus and the teletimer don't time races the same. At that distance, there's usually a pretty good gap between them. So there was a different mile in the 16th race on the card. So had I just plugged in the Trackus times, it would make this race look faster than it really was. So I timed it from video and went that direction.
Gotcha. Let's move on to Del Mar and discuss the stakes racing that took place out there last weekend. Wasn't a graded stakes event, but one that a lot of people's eyes were on Saturday was the Shared Belief, one of the preps for the Kentucky Derby. And I think most people were expecting Honor AP to kind of solidify himself as one of the Derby favorites along with Tiz the Law. He only had 3 rivals to beat in this race, but he couldn't quite do it. Never really looked like a winner of this race at any point. Some might criticize the ride that he got a little bit because he did make that premature move into the first turn. That said, though, he still had his chance and just couldn't quite get it done against Thousand Words, who seems like he's back from the dead. I mean, this horse seemed like he was going nowhere back in the springtime, but Bob Baffert's really resurrected his form.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because he was kind of written off for a while, and deservedly so. I mean, he was running terrible races at Oaklawn, but since getting back to California, he seems to have rebounded. And I'm not going to knock Honor AP too much for this effort. I think it's a little shorter than what he wants. He obviously had some trouble at the start when the other Bob Baffert horse, kind of Cezanne, kind of crashed into him early. And I don't even have any trouble with the premature move because the pace was pretty tepid. We don't have it coded in blue, but the fractions, the pace figures were kind of escalating throughout the race. So I thought it was a decent enough effort. They both got really good figures for 3-year-olds. 1,000 Words, a 124, Honor AP, a 123. We do have to keep in mind we're in August now, so comparing these preps for the Derby isn't like back when we were comparing them in March and April. You would expect these horses to be running faster. We saw horses like Charlatan and Nadal running these kind of figures back in March and April. So I wouldn't say they're quite as good as them, but they're as good as what we've been seeing from horses like Tiz the Law, from Uncle Chuck, who we're going to see in the Travers coming up this weekend. So it was a strong effort. I am always a little bit leery of these figures in 4-horse fields. I mean, for the most part, horses get pretty trouble-free trips. You could argue that certainly wasn't the case with the start in this race, but there were other routes on the card, and the time basically told the story. It was a fast race for the class, and I'm pretty perplexed how 1,000 Words has just kind of, as you said, come back from the dead, because you don't often see that without a horse getting a lengthy break, but he really didn't. He came back after that April race in July. So just a short break, and he looks like he's found his 2-year-old form.
Yeah, I've got to be honest. This is a figure that I don't doubt the time. I have no reason to. I mean, I leave that to you, checking that stuff. I don't doubt your figure making process because, I mean, it all makes sense within the context of the day. This is just a figure that I can't buy. I mean, it's a 4-horse field. Everybody improved significantly. I'm just not seeing it. I mean, Kiss Today Goodbye got a 121. I know we were in that 112 back in February. That's a race that we had talked about, and you were even considering adjusting that down by 10 points because nobody else had run back to that figure up until this race. And Cezanne, who didn't appear to run that well, also improved by 10 points. I'm just not buying this figure. Sometimes it's just a weird circumstance where a figure just might not make sense for the horses in the race, but it makes sense within the context of the day. But as a handicapper, I kind of have to suss these out and determine which figures mean a lot to me, which I want to emphasize in my handicapping and which I don't. And this is just one that I can't quite wrap my head around. So I'll be interested to see if these horses run back to this number in the future, but I'm proceeding with a good deal of skepticism.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was hinting at. I feel the same way. It's I don't know if it's the 4-horse field thing, horses able to relax more or whatever it is. But, as a figure maker, I'm not going to just guess for no apparent reason when the times say the figures are what they are. I did check them from video. I didn't have to make any adjustments or anything like that. But I would agree with you. I'm skeptical. I certainly wouldn't consider Thousand Words a top Derby contender, even though his figure is as good as anybody who's going to show up in the race at this point. As I said, Honor AP, I still would. I'm kind of putting a line through this race. I don't think he was fully cranked up. I think it was more out to get exercise. Things didn't really go his way at a distance shorter than he likes. So I do think he is still a top contender, but I have no problem at all with your reservations on the numbers.
Yeah, and I didn't really touch upon it, but I agree with your assessment of Honor AP. John Sheriffs is just the kind of trainer that, circles a date on the calendar as a target, and he tries to get there with a bunch of prep races, and I think they're probably viewing this as just that. It's not the most important thing in the world to win the listed shared belief stakes, because this horse obviously already has the points to get into the Kentucky Derby, and, as a prep, I guess this trip probably did him well. I mean, he had to move at multiple points during the race and got some needed fitness out of it, so I'm not going to write Honor AP off based on this effort. I think it was just a stepping stone. And we also saw the 3-year-olds in action, or at least one of them, later in this Del Mar Saturday card in the Grade 1 Bing Crosby as Collusion Illusion, who has been undefeated so far this year as a 3-year-old coming back, notched another victory, this time against the older horses. This was a race that was strongly affected by the early pace, as they were really going at it on the front end, and it just completely fell apart, and Collusion Illusion got up over the fast-closing Lexingtonian.
Yeah, it was. And I think I commented on Twitter that this was one of the weakest looking Grade 1s for a sprint that I've seen in a while. And it really played out that way, and it's set up for a 3-year-old. Now, I didn't particularly like Collusion Illusion in here. He hadn't run particularly fast, but and he was the favorite, so I was against him. But given that, he adapted to the pace scenario. He got a great trip up the rail from Flavian Pratt, and he got the win. I don't even think he was the best horse in this race. He only got a 119 for the win. A couple horses behind him, Law Abiding Citizen and Wild Man Jack, actually got 122 for being part of that hot pace. They were both a little wide around the turn, so I actually think they ran better. But at the end of the day, Collusion Illusion got the job done. He's a horse I still would think needs to take a step forward to be a major contender in the sprinters. I don't think he's going to get that kind of trip every time, but he is moving in the right direction. It was a career best, and he's a horse who keeps winning races, so maybe there's more in the tank.
It's kind of funny that, there are very few Grade 1 sprints for older horses on dirt these days, aside from the Breeders' Cup Sprint, and we just saw 2 of them within the past couple of weeks, and the disparity in pace situations between this Bing Crosby and the Alfred G. Vanderbilt they ran in Saratoga is just so apparent. I mean, the horse that was scratched at the gate that we were assuming might be the one to press Volatile on the lead in the Alfred G. Vanderbilt was in this race. That was Lexingtonian, and he was way out the back door early, like 5 lengths behind the second to last horse in the early going. And I think it just speaks to the wide difference in pace situations between these 2 races.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And he's a really consistent horse. He's one that I kind of bank on for the figure. He got a 118 running in second. He's a tractable sort. Like you said, he can be up close if the pace slows down, but a lot of horses can't do that where they drop back and still make their run, but he was able to do it. So solid effort. Again, I don't think this was any Grade 1 race on paper or even after the fact. I doubt you do either, but at least Collusion Illusion is a 3-year-old with some room to go forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that. They always still have upside, but this was not the strongest Grade 1 that we've seen. We did see a pretty strong grade 1 on Sunday at Del Mar, though. That was the grade 1 Clementelle Hirsch for the older fillies and mares going a mile and the 16th. And again, we had a little bit of a changing of the guard here. The public was certainly onto it because they bet the winner, Fighting Mad, down to favoritism. I think you had to proceed with a little bit of skepticism based on her upset victory last time out in, I believe it was the Vanity when she beat Cece, earned a huge speed figure that day. And she validated the performance here because once again, she showed that high speed going to the front end, and she just never looked back. Ollie's Candy came to her late, but she was able to hold her off, and both of them earned some pretty respectable speed figures.
Yeah, I don't have an official speed figure yet. My guess is it's going to be about 125. I'll tweet that out sometime later today, what it officially is. My partner does the West Coast figures for the most part. But I mean, it certainly fits. He's done her figures earlier and they've come back. She's backed them up and run well every time. The pace was solid in here. It's not going to be coded blue or red, but the fractions or the figures were decreasing a little bit. So it's not like she had a cakewalk up front. She was running fast and was just able to handle the rest of the field. It wasn't that long ago. We were wondering if maybe Cece was at the top of the division, but now she's been handled twice in a row by Fighting Mad. I do think it'll be interesting to see what happens if she gets tangled with a little bit early in her route races. She hasn't really seen that yet. She's now 3 for 3, but she's been on a clear lead. Now, like I said, she's not doing it easily. She's going pretty fast, so another filly's going to have to run to keep up with her. But that is the one reservation that I have with her. She's fast, but I want to see what happens when she gets looked in the eye early.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I would just want to add from this race, I mean, how bad do you feel for Ollie's Candy, who it just seems like she can't get one of these grade 1 races. I think it's now 3 times in a row that she's been right there in the Apple Blossom when most of us thought she ran the best race, in the Ogden Phipps when, again, she attempted a very fast pace and just got nailed on the wire by She's a Julie. And then in this race, I mean, she was second best because Fighting Mad, as you said, I mean, she set a legitimate pace up front, but Ollie's Candy was getting to her late. Another really game try by her. There's a grade 1 race somewhere with her name on it. We'll see if maybe she even strikes on the big day later in the year. But she's just been in great form and been consistent in a division where a lot of horses haven't been. I mean, you mentioned Cece, Hard Not to Love, was also considered one of the top names in this division at the start of the year, and she finished last in this race. So we just had some up and down form in this filly and mare division throughout the year.
Yeah, I do want to mention Ollie's Candy did win this race last year. I do think it's a grade 1, was a grade 1 even last year. So she might have one under her belt, but I'll have to look that up to be sure. But yeah, she's been hard luck horse this year, just always coming close. I do like that she was coming on at the end. It's not like she just gave up and didn't, she closed that margin to within a half length at the wire. So you would like to think eventually she's going to pull one of these out. Maybe they need to find a softer spot, but I am starting to wonder if she's a horse who just doesn't like to win. Even her wins in her career have always been pretty close, except for early on the first couple times when she was in against really overmatched competition. So I'm wondering if she's just not a win type.
No, you're right about that. She did win that grade 1 last year. I think we didn't really regard her as one of the top names in this division, even at that time, because she was beating what we perceived to be a slightly weaker field. It seems like she stepped her game up now as I believe she's a 5-year-old, but she just can't quite break through this year, even though it seems like she's in the best form of her career. Wrapping up Del Mar from last week, we saw a notable performance by a first-time starter on Friday as Bob Baffert sent out the 3-year-old filly Happier to win a 7-furlong maiden event. And you had to like everything you saw from this filly. She broke sharply, set a fast pace, and just kept going, and she's bred to go longer.
Yeah, I have to be honest. This is a race I hadn't seen. I didn't even know about it because, like I said, I don't usually do the figures out west. My assistant does. And as I was looking for what races we were going to review on the show, I found this one and saw the figure and was like, oh my, that is a pretty quick race. So obviously a very good race for a filly. This is one that looks like she has stakes potential for sure, given that 116 that she ran. it's just a really strong race, and I'll be curious to see where she shows up next. Obviously, she must have had some issues not to debut until the very end of July of her 3-year-old season, but she certainly got some talent, and it wasn't like she was a big surprise. I mean, she went off 6-5, as you would expect from a Bob Baffert horse that has this kind of ability, but I would say she even exceeded it.
Yeah, and she's certainly bred to go longer distances. She is a half-sister to King Zachary, who won the Matt Win and also was the winner of that 1.75-mile Birdstone at Saratoga last year, setting, I believe, a U.S. record in that performance. That horse was by Curlin, and Happier is by Street Sense, so maybe she doesn't have quite as much stamina in her pedigree as that one does, but she's certainly bred to go farther than 7 furlongs, so we'll see what Bob Baffert does with her. But based on this performance, she's definitely quick enough to step up against some of these 3-year-old filly stakes horses later in the year. And you know that Bob Baffert can get one from the maiden ranks right into stakes company. We've seen him do that with a number of horses, so it'll be interesting to follow this one's career. Let's wrap up this show by talking about a couple of other venues. First, Monmouth Park. Their feature this past weekend was the Monmouth Oaks. Not the best group of 3-year-old fillies, and we were just talking about an up-and-coming 3-year-old filly that looks like she has so much potential. Don't know if there are any horses with that kind of ability in this race, as Hopeful Growth, who was one of the favorites in the Delaware Oaks a number of weeks ago, disappointed that day, but she certainly rebounded to win here in impressive fashion.
Yeah, it was actually a couple horses from the Delaware Oaks that ran 1-2 in here with her and Project Whiskey. I just brought this race up because I think it is a points race for the Kentucky Oaks. The top 2 ran okay, 108 figure for Hopeful Growth. It's certainly not anything that's going to scare the fillies at the top of the division, their connections. I actually, watching the race, I thought Project Whiskey might have been the best horse in the race. She had a little trouble at the break, got caught wide around the turns, and still ran a 105. But she did show that her win in the Delaware Oaks, where she won at a really big price, wasn't a fluke. She's certainly taken a big step forward since moving out the 2 turns this year.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add about this race. I didn't think that highly of the Delaware Oaks coming out of it, and this race was mostly dominated by horses exiting that race. I thought Hopeful Growth ran fine. I thought Antonio Gallardo gave her an excellent ride, saving ground early, getting her off the rail when he really needed to, coming around the far turn into the stretch. And the others, they just didn't really take that step forward that they would have needed to. So I don't think any of these horses are going to be major players in the Kentucky Oaks. But as you said, it's good to highlight these races that are offering points, and we're likely to see them in the starting gate in 5 weeks' time. The final race we'll discuss on the podcast this week is one from Ellis Park. Last Sunday was the Kentucky Downs Preview Turf Cup. They actually ran a number of stakes races on the turf at Ellis Park. This was the one with the biggest purse of them all. And Factor This really was the headline attraction in this race. I think they bet him down to odds-on favoritism. He had been in great form through the early part of the year for Brad Cox, and he put forth another strong effort here, winning going the 1.25 mile distance over a soft turf course. It was pretty game to hold on after laying down some solid fractions in the early going.
Yeah, it's just, I wanted to point this one out just because he's been in such good form. It was his 4th win in a row. What interested me is there was a mile race on the card as well, but he chose to run him in the 1.25 mile event, a distance he hadn't traveled before, and he was able to get the job done again. He ran a 122 TimeformUS speed figure. All of his wins have come in that 120 to 126 range. And what makes him particularly dangerous is he is a horse with really good early speed, but he doesn't have to be on the lead early as he wasn't in this one. He's always going to be up close, and he seems to be able to handle either way. I will say on the track rating condition thing we have, I wouldn't really call this a soft course as the official label is. It was probably closer to that maybe yielding even good condition based on the times that we saw all day, but it certainly wasn't the firm course that he was running on earlier in the year. So just another strong effort from Factor This. I'm not sure what they're going to do with him next, but trying the 1.25 mile is what piqued my interest here.
No, I mean, he's certainly earning a speed figure that's just as fast as a lot of the graded stakes races that we were talking about in New York recently. So he could definitely move back into those graded stakes or even grade one events for Brad Cox later in the year because he earned some speed figures back at the fairgrounds that suggest he's every bit as good. And while I agree with you that the times wouldn't suggest this was a soft turf course, he is a horse that won over very hard, firm going at the fairgrounds over the winter. So it's just nice to see that he's got that versatility that he can win over a variety of turf conditions. That's all we've got to recap this week. Obviously, we've got a big weekend of racing coming up at Saratoga with the Travers scheduled for this Saturday. Seems like it's kind of snuck up on us a little bit. It's not at its usual place on the calendar, but that'll be one of the last major preps for the Kentucky Derby, which will be just 4 weeks away after this weekend. So we'll record a TimeformUS forecast this upcoming Friday, presumably to discuss some of the Travers card and the big race and whatever stakes they schedule around it in addition to that on Saratoga on Saturday. So looking forward to doing a little bit of handicapping with you, Craig, later in this week. Remember, as always, you can listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back with a TimeformUS forecast on Friday.